I'll take any other questions.
Representative Farmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, as I'm listening, I'm thinking to myself, you don't understand. You don't truly understand why you're standing there today. You don't truly understand why I authored that resolution. And it wasn't an easy thing for me to do. But I'm hearing you blame this on your youth. But just because you don't get your way and you grab a couple friends doesn't mean you can come to the well while we're conducting business in session. Other members are waiting to have their bills to be heard. They have constituents too, 60, 70,000 times another 80, millions of people. Just because you don't get your way, you can't come to the well, bring your friends, and throw a temper tantrum with an adolescent bullhorn. It doesn't give you the right to enrage folks that are here to watch this body conduct business and talk about things you know good and well that we've worked very hard to protect our children here in the state of Tennessee. Very hard. You know what? And what you could do, you could file a piece of legislation that maybe you'd do that instead of sitting back and criticizing folks that's worked really hard for the past decade to do so. That might be a place to start. But certainly don't start by commandeering the well while we're conducting business here in this Tennessee General Assembly. That's why you're standing there, because of that temper tantrum that day, for that yearning to have attention. That's what you wanted. Well, you're getting it now. So I just advise you, if you want to conduct business in this house, file a bill. Be recognized, stand there and present it, and pass it. All you got to do is pass the bill.
Representative Pearson.
Now, you all heard that. How many of you would want to be spoken to that way? How many of you would want to be spoken to that way? We're not talking about politics. We're not talking about even gun violence. How many of you would want to be spoken to that way? The reason that I believe the sponsor of this legislation, of this resolution, spoke that way is because he's comfortable doing it. Because there's a decorum that allows it. There's a decorum that allows you to belittle people. We didn't belittle nobody. What we said was that we cannot be beholden to gun lobbyists, to the NRA. We can't be beholden to organizations that don't want to see us make progress on gun violence. We can't be beholden to folks who don't want to see us help save our communities and protect them. But there's something else I think that the sponsor of this resolution has alluded to, and there were a few things here that you said that I want to address. He called a peaceful protest a temper tantrum. Is what's happening outside these doors by Tennesseans who want to see change a temper tantrum? It's Sarah, whose son Noah was at the Covenant School. He survived. He's 5 years old. And she showed up here demanding that we do something about gun violence. Is that a temper tantrum? Is elevating our voices for justice or change a temper tantrum? But there's something in the decorum of this body that makes it okay to say that folks who are exercising their First Amendment rights to speak up for the hundreds of thousands of people collectively that we represent. There's something in the decorum of this body that says it's okay to call that a temper tantrum, to call people we disagree with on the issues, to say that all they want is attention. But I'll tell you what, I don't personally want attention. What I want is attention on the issue of gun violence. But instead, we're here with a resolution you put up talking about expelling me for advocating for ending gun violence in the state of Tennessee. I'd much rather be talking with you about legislation to protect Shelby County and to protect our communities than talking about why we don't deserve to have our representation lost because we came to the well of this house saying we've got to do something. That's what I would like to be doing.
Nice.
And so you brought attention or tried to bring attention to me, but I want to turn the attention to the people. The people who will never be able to throw a temper tantrum for gun violence. You know, the Larry Thorns, the Catherine Kuntzes, the Mike Hills, the Cynthia Peaks, the Evelyn Decaus, the Haley Scruggs, the William Kennedys, who will never have a chance to throw what you call a temper tantrum for justice, for gun reform, for the ending of gun violence. They'll never have a chance because we haven't taken our oath seriously. Because we don't take people who we disagree with seriously. We tell them, you just are throwing a temper tantrum. And again, these are the same folks who live in one of the greatest democracies, as we've been told, in the United States of America. A place, in an institution, in fact, I would argue, that was built on protest. An institution that was built on people throwing temper tantrums against injustice and what they viewed as injustice. It isn't a temper tantrum to say that kids should actually go to schools that are safe. Neighborhoods shouldn't have to have thousands of police officers to be safe. We shouldn't have to worry about going to the grocery store, as in some cases going to the movie theater, and someone coming with an assault rifle and killing us. That's not throwing a temper tantrum, sponsor. That's just asking for us to do right. You said something else. You said, you don't understand why you're here. I promise you, I fully understand why I am here. I am here because the people in District 86 brought me here. I'm here because the people in District 86 asked that we might fight for justice against the status quo here. I'm here because we are subversive to the status quo. One that is young, one that is diverse, one that calls into question the ways that we have been operating that are not working. Because if they were working, those kids would be alive. Larry would be alive. People in our communities and in our families, TJ would be alive. If the system was working the way it was supposed to, because my cousin would be alive. But that's not what's happening. And look, I wrote y'all a letter. I hand-delivered a letter to everybody. And I said, look, I take full accountability and responsibility for my actions on the House floor and that it broke decorum. I told y'all that. And I also told you that there was in no world or way that I thought that would lead to us being expelled from this house that we got elected into by our constituency. Who would have ever thought that? That for 30 seconds or less before the speaker called a recess could lead to our expulsion from the State House. That is anti-democratic. That is not right. That is not just. So yes, I still take full responsibility for my actions. I know exactly why I am here serving. I know exactly why I'm fighting for our community, why I'm fighting to continue to be in this institution to help create change. I know exactly why I'm doing that, and I know exactly why this resolution was brought forward, and I don't think it has a lot to do with the 30 seconds before the recess. I think it has to do with the issue that we were talking about. You said something else, that we are just criticizing folks and setting, instead of just setting back and criticizing folks, put forward some legislation. Well, some good legislation has been put forward, y'all. I hear representatives on our side have legislation that can lead to protecting our communities, including red flag laws and gun storage as well. And I ask that you might work to actually pass that legislation, because we are going to continue to fight for just legislation. We're going to continue to fight to ensure that more lives are not lost to the epidemic of gun violence in our communities. And so, yes, if I'm expelled from this house, I will not have the opportunity to fight for that legislation as a member, but you can believe that I will continue to fight for our communities and to fight for just legislation in the state of Tennessee. With that, if anyone has any more questions or comments.
Representative Beck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been trying to get the podium all day, but I've been cut off, and I know that's part of our democracy. But I wanted to just talk to y'all real quick about when I wasn't here. We've had 3 cases now, 4 of people being expelled from the House. The only one that I've been at was Jeremy Durham up until Representative Jones earlier. But Jeremy Durham, about half of y'all were here then. I kept hearing that Jeremy Durham did not have his due process. Do you remember that, the ones who were here? Due process, due process. So let's talk about due process just a minute. Due process is under the Constitution, where if we take your life, liberty, or property, there's a process that the government has to go through. And obviously, we're not sentencing him to death. Obviously, we're not taking his liberty by sending him to jail. But we are taking his property. His job is his property. His elected position in this House is his property. And because of that, and we are a government entity, he deserves, Representative Pearson deserves, and all 3 of them deserve due process under the Constitution. We've heard a lot about the Constitution today, but this is rock solid due process. And under the due process, you've got to have inquiries. You've got to, we heard about under Jeremy Durham, had a ad hoc committee to investigate it. The Attorney General appointed a committee to investigate it. And yet we still get to, months later, not a week later, months later, we get to a position where we are in a special session to expel Jeremy Durham. That was months, years maybe, after the first accusations of the sexual harassment came out, and other accusations. But where I'm going with this, ladies and gentlemen, is that none of these 3 were given their due process. There was no investigation. If there was an investigation, if there was a time, then maybe these articles of expulsion would have been correct, would have been accurate. We keep hearing different things, different accused that are said that they have been done. Well, if we would have slowed this down, given them due process, like anyone that we're taking their property from, then yes, we would be in a lot better position to make a decision on young Representative Pearson. And a point of order, I've got a question for the clerk. Mr. Clerk. Mr. Clerk, is it against the House rules to approach the well without the Speaker's permission?
Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that is not contained in the House rules.
Representative Beck.
So when young Representative Pearson admitted to breaking decorum because he went to the well without the permission of the Speaker, in fact, he was not breaking House rules or House decorum. He didn't know that he wasn't breaking House rules or House decorum. So when he says that he did, he was actually in error.
Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, I believe part of the issue was that the members weren't recognized, which is part of the rules.
Representative Beck.
But the representative said earlier he thought he broke the rules because he came to the well without permission, which that was not a violation of our House rules. And with proper due process, all this could have been vetted, and we would have been in a process where we would have seen the video that was spliced from 4 different angles, 4 different people who took it, and been able to authenticate it and given you true due process.
Representative Pearson.
Yeah, Bill, I appreciate that, and I'm still learning a lot about these rules as you see, and appreciate you sharing that. And what I agree with is that this has not been a very fair process. We were told Monday that we'd be expelled Thursday. We're never given any idea of how this process would work, whether or not we would even have, how much time we would have to be here before you, to talk to you all about the reason that we needed to remain here. We weren't given due process, but this wasn't and isn't fair. And I think what ultimately has happened, and this is the tragedy of this moment, is this very undemocratic process has already led to the expulsion of one member from the State House General Assembly, Representative Justin Jones. And operating in this way means that it doesn't have anything to do with the rules. The rules that are being broken, which seem to become more finite, could have been addressed by Section 19, which would have led to censure, which you all passed in the Permanent House Rules of Order for the 113th General Assembly, could have led to censure. But to expel members from this body that we were duly elected into doesn't have to do with the breaking of a rule or something like that even. I think it has to do with working to silence the voices of people calling for action and change, particularly as it relates to gun violence. I don't want us to forget that. Right? We're here because we were not recognized when it came the time to talk about gun violence, and it was time for us, and it is time for us to do something. That is ultimately what has led to the use of our First Amendment rights and the protesting against injustice on the State House floor, in order that we might elevate the issues of our community and our constituents who are in need and asking for us to do something. And so it's very helpful to know that the rule I even thought I broke wasn't even a rule in the first place. But to be able to bend the rules or skip the rules for certain folks, or to use the rules against duly elected members of this body for either politically motivated reasons or ideologically motivated reasons, are wrong. And not only is it about setting a bad precedent for generations and generations to come, it's bad today, right? For people who still believe and have faith in what Tennessee can be, for the young people who still are marching and still are speaking out, saying that this is still an institution, a place where change can happen. But if we hang on to those principalities and that wickedness that is too often before us, instead of continuously working to improve and continuously working to grow and working to actually create just legislation and not call people who are advocating for it, folks who are calling for temper tantrums, if we don't get beyond that, we will not be able to build this institution or our state into what we know it can and should be, which is a place where we don't have the issues of poverty that we have, where we've expanded medical care for everybody. We want to build a place where everybody in this state can become who God has called for them to be. And at this point, in this place, instead of working on those things, we're working to expel people whose voices we disagree with and whose ideologies and perspectives about the liberation of everybody we view as wrong.
Lear Lambert.
Representative Pearson. You know, I've said here today, and I haven't said much. This is a difficult day, I think, for all of us and for all of Tennessee. Like many others that have spoken on both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democrat, and all of the people that are here today, because they have families, they have jobs, they have homes. We are all on this House floor because this is important. And you would agree with that, I hope, correct?
Representative Pearson.
Of course.
Lear Lambert.
I've struggled when I listen to you speak about what you think about the rest of your colleagues here, because we are colleagues. You ran and were elected by the people of your district. So was I. Why do you feel like when there are hundreds of bills that are being filed, there are hundreds of hours of work being put in by all of these people who have children and grandchildren and constituents who have been killed by violence, and yes, gun violence and others, And yet you stand here and you came to the well of this chamber and silenced 96 other voices. And the stuff you have said, because I respect you, I actually literally respect you. You're a very intelligent individual. You're very zealous. You're very passionate about what you believe in. I am passionate about my constituents as well. I don't want any child anywhere in this state to be in danger. You've heard me say those words, but you don't seem like you believe that any of us care about our constituents as much as you care about yours. Though many people in this body have served their communities for decades, both Republican and Democrat. When you step into the well with a bullhorn and are yelling and screaming and are sharing with the people of this state that you believe that none of us care, and you shut down the ability of even a response, surely you can at least admit that that is an egregious thing to shut out other voices, because only together with everybody's thoughts at the table, everybody's voice at the table, can we possibly solve the problems that plague our day. Every single voice is important. Yours, mine, everyone's. Does it not matter to you that in doing so, you shut down every other voice and elevated yourself even above the very families who were going through hell because their loved ones were killed? And it appeared to us as if in that broach of protocol, it's not about the rules. It's about that you elevated yourself above the very dead bodies that had not been put in the ground yet. How can you not get that? We all of us, want to make sure that there's no more children killed. Surely you get that, but I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond. I understand that your voice matters. I would ask that you explain to this body why you feel like ours do not. Because on almost every single bill you've spoken, and I think your questions have been illuminated in certain issues that I might not have thought about, because I haven't walked in your shoes, you haven't walked in mine. But those rules are there so that we can have this back and forth, instead of people just shouting at each other in which nothing gets resolved. I wanted to share that because I wanted to hear your thoughts on how coming to the House floor with a bullhorn and drowning out the voice of my constituents is helpful in this exchange, because this is the way that I know how to resolve things, to talk about them and share ideas and share our differences in a way that comes to better results. What are your thoughts on that?
Representative Pearson.
Leader Lambert, you're wrong. I don't think that one person's voice is more important than anybody's, especially the 96 or so other folks. But what about the thousands of people who were here that Thursday who you never recognized? What about the thousands of people here who your colleagues never made eye contact with or smirked at and gave a thumbs up or laughed at? What about the thousands of people who came here saying, we need to end gun violence and we need you to do something, and they were called insurrectionists by the Speaker of this House? What about the thousands of people who marched the streets of Nashville and came up to this Capitol asking that we do something, but instead of getting just legislation that might protect our schools, we're saying put more guns in schools? I have to tell you, Leader Lambert, I'm shocked that you would say that you care so much about debate in this moment. I am, because I've seen and talked with a young person today who said they came to you and they were talking with you, and there was another representative, Representative Jones, there, and he was trying to speak with you, and you yelled at him, "I've heard enough from you, young man." You said that to another equal member of this body. And so it is hard for me to now listen to you, a person who has yet to put forward legislation that I believe, or that I think has had the true input of other members of this House and other members of this body's input that could actually help protect and save our communities. I haven't heard you talk about the red flag gun laws that you're ready to propose. I haven't heard you talk about the gun storage bills that you're ready to propose. I haven't heard you talking about those things or putting resources or money towards our communities that are suffering from gun violence. I haven't heard you do those things just yet. And so it is very difficult for me to stand here now for you to think that I am trying to elevate myself above the people who were killed at Covenant or my own people, like Dr. Yvonne Nelson or Larry Thorne or T.J. Crutcher. It's really difficult for you to look me in the eye and tell me that I'm putting myself above people who have been killed by gun violence, who I know personally and who I don't know personally but advocate for. When in this house, on that day when we returned, instead of putting forward just legislation, we moved on as business as usual. We had only one representative to speak about the shooting at Covenant, and we moved on. So don't tell me, sir, that debate is so important to us when you didn't stand up and tell the speaker, we need to make sure that all members can speak
Hello,
now.
baby. You should slaughter me like little bunny hat, innit?
Go ahead, Leader Lambert.
Leader Lambert,
You're
the first 5
faggy.
ran out. That was his 5. We'll put you
I'll
back on the
give
list.
you
and
an
come back.
AK for that
I'm
bunny
sorry.
hat, innit?
Sorry. No, we don't. We'll come right back. It's fine.
I
We'll
doubt it,
We'll
mate.
be back in 5 minutes or less, potentially. Representative Harris.
When I look at you, I see myself. If I'm unable to see you as my brother, then it is if I look.
Representative Harris.
When I look at you, I see myself. If I'm unable to see you as my brother, then it is my vision that is blurred. I don't want to talk to the members about this. I just want to talk to you directly as another young brother in this legislature. I remember when I first got here, I think that I would walk by people, even now I still do, and one thing every member is going to be able to say is that I speak to every single person. I'm going to say, hey, how are you? How's it going? I'm going to speak to every single person. Everybody doesn't speak back. So we're going to talk about silence. On these committees that we serve on, I understand where you're coming from on this because a lot of times there is a lot of silence. You can ask to speak on something and it's going to be silenced. I served on a committee last year that the speaker can actually attest to. I asked the speaker to be removed from the committee because a rule was put in place that we had to provide the questions ahead of time. So we were being silenced. I look back at a few weeks ago, I was in a committee, and the chairman, who I have the utmost respect for, heard me ask for a question and ignored me, silenced. It happens so often here. We have to find our place. So whereas you decided to go to the well to speak on behalf of people, thousands of people, because we had been silenced for so long, that buildup happens. I was talking to a member on yesterday about today's proceedings, and they said, well, I respect you. I respect you highly. I think of you greatly now. When I first got here, people had an opinion of who I was before they had even gotten to know who I was. You got here a week and a half ago. They haven't had an opportunity to get to know who you are. They've already made their decision. And that's okay. We'll see you back. What I want you to know, though, is that as you do it, do everything in love.
when I leave out of this place, I'll be here for some time. I mean, if you look around this room, a lot of these members may retire, be dead and gone, but rules and stuff will still change, and you'll be here. We have an obligation to serve and represent people, every single one of us. And while things may not pan out the way you want it to right now, just know it really did work out. And I say that because if you watched an hour or so ago, it didn't really work out. And so we're here now. People are looking, paying attention to every single thing we do, respectfully. We had a member from our community that was murdered, Tyree Nichols. Murdered. We talked about him for 1 week. We had 6 individuals killed recently, 3 children, 3 adults. And we would have talked about them for 1 week had you not done what you did last Thursday. You allowed for more voices to be heard. Now, while I may have done things a little different, you made a difference that everybody's going to remember. And I promise you, those young people, the people that's going to pass away in the future, things that may happen in the future, they're going to get heard. And when you go back home, just know you did a great job. Matthew 25:21 says, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." It has been a joy to work with you, no matter what happens here today.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you, Representative Harris. And indeed, we are in a movement rooted in love. The movement for justice, the movement to end gun violence, the movement to end poverty, to ensure every kid gets good education, the movement to ensure everybody has access to health care. It's rooted in love because it's rooted in the belief that every person has value. And I know that's countercultural or that's subversive to some people's way of thinking, but it is rooted in love. And that is how we can, and that is the way we must operate. But I want to speak to this because I don't know what's going to happen. But I'll promise you that it's all right with me. What I will say is that those silences that my colleague is talking about, it's an institutional problem. And I see a lot of chairmen here talking and a lot of other leaders here of the party that's in positions of power right now. And I'm really speaking to the chair folk. Y'all have a responsibility to make sure your committees still are democratic. I've watched the committee hearings, and oftentimes, you get folks calling the question before any other colleague gets to ask any question, even when they have valid points. You get folks, I came up here last year fighting for this environmental justice legislation. We had 6 people who were supposed to speak on the committee, and it turned into miraculously just 2. Upholding the ideal that all of us want for democracy, the idea that folks died for and that they fought for and that they cried for and that they gave their lives for. Folk like my granddaddy who fought in World War II in Vietnam, folk who have given and sacrificed for this country. The responsibility to hold together this democracy does not just fall on the hands of the people who are being persecuted. It's actually the people who are in positions of power. Because when you don't, you abuse the power. And this resolution sponsored, this is, in my eyes and many folks' eyes, an abuse of power. But I would say to you, no matter what happens, I'm all right. But I want y'all to know who remain. That each of you have an obligation to stop turning the people's house into your own club. That the folks who sit in committees with you, who got elected just like you, who swore the same oath that you swore, they deserve a voice in these committee rooms, and we deserve a voice on this House floor. The erosion of democracy in the state legislature is what got us here. It wasn't walking up to the well. It was being disruptive to a status quo that silences the minority. And it is wrong. And the people in this state and the people across the country and the world, whoever's watching, are wanting to see a change. Just because you have power doesn't give you the right to abuse it. Because even if I disagree with your constituents on political issues, I do agree on the principle for which my ancestors fought and died, which is that they would have a democracy. A democracy, as one said, that is governed by the people and for the people, not one that's governed by ideas and principalities and beliefs and ideological divides that try and silence folk. It's horrible that someone who got elected just like you can't even get a good morning from you. Somebody who got elected just like you can't speak in committee sitting next to you. But then you come here to persecute me and tell me you just don't understand the rules of debate. When I know for a fact this House has not been a place of debate for Democrats. This House has not been a place of debate for people who are transgender. This House has not been a place of debate for people who are LGBTQIA. This House has not been a place of debate for people who are already persecuted in our society. This House ain't even been a place of debate for people who wear beautiful dashikis in honor of their ancestors who made it over. And so it's one thing to hold the ideals up in this moment, to talk about today, to talk about how good democracy is working in Tennessee in this moment as you prepare to persecute individuals for expulsion. It is one thing to talk about those ideals, but it's another thing to actually be in this house, to see members being misnamed. Folks won't even say.
That was your 5. No, that was the new 5. That was the second 5. Sorry. We're going next. Is it parliamentary question? What's the question? Mr. Clerk. Got it. All right. Representative Hawk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't plan to speak today. We're talking about the committee system, and we're talking about floor actions like this is something new. The supermajority that we've heard about through conversations today, that's what's new. The Democratic Party had control of both bodies of the legislature for 140 years. And early on, I couldn't get a bill heard. I couldn't get recognized in committee. I had a challenging time ever having a conversation on the floor about a concern that I have. There were certain people who were able to pass bills. There are certain people who were able to talk on bills. So it's not something that's new. And all that being said, 2 wrongs don't make a right. Even though it did happen for 140 years, I think that the Speaker, I think that most, if not all, of our committee chairmen have gone out of their way to have people heard, much more so than what I experienced in my early years down here. I heard an interesting reaction from the crowd a few moments ago as someone was talking about when this legislature changes and when members who may be here now may be dead and gone. And the crowd outside cheered like that. The crowd cheered when that was mentioned. And that hurts my heart that anyone could wish or laugh when we're talking about our members being gone, members being dead and gone. That's what's being discussed. We talk about the focus not being on an individual, but we're seeing that individual right now bring the focus to himself. I heard there was also said earlier, people had opinions of who I was before people even knew who I was. And we were talking about how to learn the rules and how many rules there are and how it's a challenge to learn the rules in such a short time. And one of the way I learned the rules down here was from senior members. And I came on the floor several weeks ago and expressed the way that I learned the rules of the House.